Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we're going to be talking about the Utah Jazz. Specifically, we're going to be talking about whether the Jazz should be looking to trade Lauri Markkanen, or whether they should keep him and continue trying to build around him. So there's been a lot of big names on the move this offseason, and some of the recent focus from NBA media has gone to Lauri Markkanen, with I think multiple teams sort of expressing interest in trying to trade for him. So that's led to a lot of questions, which team would get him, what would the asking price be, etc. But the real question that should be asked here is whether the Jazz should be looking to trade him at all. So to keep things as simple as possible, we'll just break it down into two general categories: arguments in favor of trading Markkanen and arguments, obviously, against the trade. We'll start with the arguments in support of the trade first and foremost. The idea here that some people have floated forward is that Markkanen's success has sort of split the focus of the organization. When the Jazz committed to trading away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, it was sort of the signal for a full rebuild, right? For a borderline tanking scenario for Utah. And now the team isn't sure whether it should stay committed to that plan of bottoming out and tanking and rebuilding, or trying to pivot towards building up something around Markkanen right now. So the idea would be the plan was to tank, so stick to the plan effectively. Part of that perspective is reinforced by the idea that this current version of the Jazz really has not worked out all that well. They've won 37 and 31 games over the past 2 years and have not made the postseason. If you're looking at the team in particular last year, they were pretty damn bad defensively. Dead last in the league in terms of defensive rating, 29th in terms of points allowed, 26th in field goals allowed, 30th in three-pointers allowed, 30th in three-point percentage allowed. So the Jazz were one of, if not the worst team defensively in the league. And the idea is that's not a problem that could be solved in the short term, right? It's easier to tank and rebuild and reset fully than to try to fix a team being one of the worst defenses in the league in the span of 2 to 3 years. That would be sort of the argument on that front. There is something to be said for that, but the final point here in support of a trade for Markkanen is honestly probably the one I should have started with. Does Markkanen actually want to be a part of the Jazz long term? If Lauri Markkanen goes to the Jazz organization and says, hey, I'm not re-signing, I'm not signing a new contract, I'm not signing an extension, then all of this means nothing, right? All of this talk is basically useless, and the Jazz have to trade him before he walks in free agency for nothing. So that kind of just shuts down a lot of the discussion. If Markkanen will not re-sign, then you've got to move him for assets while you still can. Barring that scenario, though, taking a look at arguments against trading Markkanen, the first one here is, isn't Lauri Markkanen exactly what the Jazz presumably sort of want, right? The theoretical point of a rebuild is to reset your roster and collect assets and cheap young players on controllable contracts in the hopes of striking gold and finding your star of the future, finding that guy that you can build the roster around for the next, 5 to 10 years. Markkanen does appear to be, on paper, exactly that, right? At the time of recording, he's 27 years old. Since he joined the Jazz, he's averaged 24.5 points per game, 8.4 rebounds, and 1.9 assists on 49% shooting from the field and 39.5% shooting from three. He's also made an all-star appearance while a member of the Jazz in the 2022-2023 season, and he won Most Improved Player in that same season. So he's got the stats, he's got the accolades, he's 27 years old. That does appear to be exactly the kind of person that the Jazz would want to build around moving forward. Another point sort of in defense here of keeping Markkanen is the fact that the Jazz kind of needed some time to adjust their initial strategy. I mentioned in the previous section that their organizational focus had sort of split, and that is true, right? The Jazz were planning on being bad when Markkanen sort of blew up and sort of put his face out there as a potential star player. The Jazz were starting to sort of spiral towards a full rebuild and nearly a tanking scenario, and all of a sudden you've got a guy who's playing the way that Markkanen was. It feels like you shouldn't expect an organization to instantly be able to pivot and start competing in the space of maybe 1 or 1.5 seasons. So it's a little bit weird. A lot of people basically say Markkanen's had 2 years in Utah, but technically speaking, yes, he has been in Utah for 2 seasons, but it's taken time for Utah to adjust to the fact that, Markkanen is a player that they might want to build around. And speaking of sort of building around Markkanen, that is kind of the final argument here in support of keeping him. Presumably, he is a cornerstone that you can build around. If you're going to keep him long term, it is going to be a little bit expensive, right? You're looking at, a 4-year contract or something in that nature, paying, I would guess, at least $30 million a year for Markkanen based on what we've seen in the market recently. But you can work around that. That is a manageable sort of contract, especially if you look at some of the other financial constraints that the Jazz potentially won't have in the future. Right? John Collins is currently the player making the most money on the team. He comes off the books by 2026 at the latest. 2026 is also when the contracts of Sexton and Clarkson will be ending as well. So 3 of your 4 biggest salaries will be off the books by 2026. Young guys that the Jazz presumably feel good about at the moment, like Walker Kessler and Keontae George, will be around the ends of their rookie deals as well. So you will either look to re-sign them if they are a piece you want to keep, or you could potentially look to trade them for assets at that point. So you'll have a re-signed or extended Markkanen who will still be under 30 and presumably in this scenario still producing at the level that he has been. The team's other financial commitments will either be expiring or will have proven their value and could re-sign them, and the team will have young players and still potentially incoming picks from their previous trades to either further build around Markkanen and whoever you keep, or cash them in to try and find some sort of co-star for Lauri Markkanen on the trade market. So that is, kind of best case scenario a little bit here, but it is certainly a possibility for Utah. In terms of which of these 2 avenues that I lean towards, at this point, I am almost always in support of the plan that lets a team avoid outright tanking. So I will admit that I do have some bias on that front. However, even with that in mind, I still don't really see too much of a point in trading Markkanen at the moment, unless he just straight up will not re-sign with Utah. As I said before, if he will not sign long-term, trade him, get something for him before he walks. But if that isn't the case here, the trade scenario feels like one where the Jazz give up on what's kind of proven to work so far in Markkanen for a pretty low chance of resetting, rebuilding, tanking, and getting a difference maker in the draft, right? The most immediate name that comes to mind, just because he's been in the news lately, is someone like Cooper Flagg, right? But we've seen before, over the last couple of seasons, the teams that tank, and sometimes it works. Sometimes you're San Antonio and you get, Wembanyama. Other times you tank and you still end up seeing that pick drop out of the top 2 or 3 entirely. So tanking now does not guarantee that it will pay off in the long term, and taking that risk when you have Markkanen already on your roster right now, putting up provable, quantifiable stats for you, does feel a little bit too risky for Utah. But that's my opinion. As I said, I'm biased. I want to see as few teams just straight up tanking as possible. So I would like for the Jazz to keep Markkanen and try to build around him. But what do you think? Do you believe Utah should try to trade him? And if you do, where do you think he goes? What do you think the asking price will be for him in that potential trade? But other than that, feel free to let me know what you think. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.